This is Entre Ed Talk, the podcast for entrepreneurial educators by entrepreneurial educators. We are your hosts, Toy Hirschman and
Amber Ravenscroft. This podcast is created by the National Consortium for Entrepreneurship Education, or Entre Ed for short. All right, everyone, welcome back to Entre Ed Talk. We are super excited to have one of my good friends here today with us, Mr. Steve Rice. He is an educator, connector, and speaker, and serves as the entrepreneurship instructor at the Arkansas School for Mathematics, Sciences, and the Arts. It's recognized by the Washington Post, Newsweek, and the Daily Beast as one of the top 25 public high schools in the United States. At ASMSA, Mr. Rice originated an innovative, hands-on, student-driven capstone course based on Lean Launchpad, evidence-based entrepreneurship, a master's level course developed at UC Berkeley and Stanford. Lean Launchpad is the framework of the National Science Foundation's Innovation Core, I-Core program to commercialize research in education. Mr. Rice's interests include entrepreneurship, social business, and equity. He serves as an instructor for the iFund, a virtual startup accelerator for early-stage startups, and has guest lectured at the University of Arkansas Little Rock. Rice has spoken on the integration of innovation in tech at conferences for computer science educators at the state and national level. Along with his roles professionally, Mr. Rice is an active leader in the Central Arkansas business community, serving on the board of directors for the Arkansas Economic Acceleration Foundation. He is also on the board of advisors for the Girls of Promise Coding Initiative with the Women's Foundation of Arkansas. In 2016, he founded the Start Here Initiative, a community-led initiative that seeks to close the gap in access to capital for underrepresented entrepreneurs. He is a frequently sought-after speaker on the topics of entrepreneurship, tech, and equity. We're super excited to have him today. Hi, Steve.
Hey there. I guess I just could have cut some of that out and we could just
No, I enjoyed it. I'm a little winded, but that's okay.
We have so many amazing guests, and it's just really hard because you guys do so many things, and we want to let everyone know what you're doing. But yeah, it's a very long list of awesomeness. So welcome.
So first off, that was a very good, the first question is always about like your entrepreneurial trajectory.
Sure.
So just from reading that bio, there are so many things that you have done. So we'd love if you could tell us a little bit about like what you wanted to be when you were growing up and how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, so like most kind of dyed-in-the-wool entrepreneurial types, I kind of just jump all over the place and see, I call it shiny ball syndrome. It's like, ooh, a shiny ball, and you go chase it, and it's like a little puppy. So that's been an apt analogy of my career, I think. I don't particularly remember growing up wanting to be anything specifically, like a fireman or a police officer or something, other than I really was infatuated with this idea of writing and communication very early on. And so that informed my development, I think, to some extent. But really, when it comes to entrepreneurship and kind of the startup world, I really didn't know that was an option. I didn't know that, starting a business was an actual career that people follow. And I think that's common for a lot of people, unless you grew up in a household where, there are entrepreneurs or, people are starting businesses. A lot of students that I come across just don't even know that's a viable option, that they can do it in a way that is that reduces risk and allows them to be successful, and they don't know how to get there. And so I've spent the last really 40 years trying to figure that out, through the School of Hard Knocks. And what I hope to be to my students is a shorter path than it took me.
A lot of times we have our guests and our friends that kind of have that same story. And when we speak with kids all the time, we talk to them about that option. It's really, sometimes it's as simple as letting them know that that's even an option, and that building your work around the life you want versus having to build your life around you. Okay, I went to college, I got this job, and here's where I'm going to live, and here's what I'm going to do. And it was never something that was ever given to me as a kid. And like you said, the same thing. I call it squirrel syndrome. But
yes.
But the same thing. And it wasn't until I got introduced to this kind of entrepreneurial world where it struck me like lightning, and probably you the same. Oh, I'm not nuts. I'm just entrepreneurial.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people when they recognize that, or if they recognize that, they don't know what to do with it. And so I started a few businesses, and I failed pretty spectacularly at them, and didn't know how to run a business well. And I'm a dreamer, like I'm a visionary guy, and I had to learn how to match that kind of capacity for dream building as with execution and with follow through, and all of those things that I think now make me fairly formidable in what I do, because it's that balance of both, having the vision, but also having the strategic planning and the project management skills to follow through, that makes somebody be able to kind of create that life that they want to live.
And you know what I think is really interesting is your trajectory, right? Like, you have been all over the place, your shiny ball syndrome, and you chose to go into education, which is one of the most hierarchied industries that exist. But I think that the reason that you are, I'm just pointing it out, guys. Like, I'm just throwing it out there.
We're here with you.
So, I mean, it's just kind of crazy, right? That somebody like you with such a different, diverse set of goals, and like you kind of always look for the newest thing, that you ended up in an education environment, particularly a public school. So I think this is really a good opportunity to showcase why ASMSA is so different. And like, can you talk a little bit about the school as an entity itself?
Yeah, so there's a story there.
Oh, good. I love stories.
Yeah, so when I was first approached about this job, I said, nope, don't want it, literally. And because I had seen this listing, our town and our state is very small. Arkansas is a small state, and I had seen this listing for this entrepreneurship instructor. And when I read the listing, it was very kind of HR speak, come teach a thing, do this thing. I was like, that's not what I want to do. And I was like, no. And fortunately, the gentleman who's my boss now lobbied me to take a meeting with the school director. And I think this speaks a lot to kind of the perspective that the school has, and the impact it's had on our state over the last 25 years. It was founded 25 years ago, and really in the landscape of education in Arkansas. And so we are a non-traditional public school. We're a residential school, so the students live there for their final 2 years of high school. So their junior and senior year, they're with us. And we're a small campus. We're about 250, 280 students per year, depending on the year and the enrollment. But it's a great environment to innovate in. We're fortunate to have administration, director, and the dean of academic affairs that are very innovative. They're open to new solutions and new ideas. And I think that's indicative of our students as well. If you're going to leave home 2 years before you would normally have to, and move across state for an academic experience that's different than what you would get at home, you tend to be more innovative anyway. And I have a lot of brilliant colleagues who are very innovative, who kind of paved the way for me, honestly. I mean, we have a class on campus with a combined course in physics and creative writing. And it's actually a time travel class where you study the physics of time travel, and then you write about it in the form of a short story. And so I've had, colleagues who are much smarter than I am, that have kind of paved the way in this kind of innovative environment. But yeah, ASMSA has really been unique in the state in providing students an opportunity to get a different type of education. And that's been really exciting.
Do students come from all over the state to go there? Because it's residential. Is that how do students get to go to ASMSA? How does that happen?
Yeah, so my boss calls it Hogwarts for smart kids. So we actually have a sorting hat, and they come from, on the train from, no. Actually, yes, any student in the state can apply to come to the school. So it is similar to a university in the sense that it is application-based. They have to apply to be admitted to the school. We're one of, I believe, 16 residential public high schools in the country similar to this, that are focused in STEM or STEAM initiatives. One of our main focuses is to provide access and success for high ability, low income students. And so ASMSA actually lead benchmark institutions like ours in representation of low income students. And we actually double the national average. So I think a third of our students qualify for free and reduced lunch, or come from homes that qualify. And so it's a great opportunity for students, no matter their background or socioeconomic standing, to be able to get a world-class education. And that's one thing I think that makes the school unique, is because the student body is so diverse in that regard. And we have a lot of students, and over the course of the school's history, we've had students from every one of the more than 70 counties in Arkansas. And so it's been a great kind of experiment in education that has worked really well for the state.
Wow, that's really interesting. And then you created your own entrepreneurship course for your school. A lot of people, when they think about entrepreneurship classes, they think business, traditional business class, marketing, basic stuff, which are good principles to understand. But we believe not really hitting the nail on the head as far as growing that entrepreneur, that innovation, that creativity within students. So what is different about your course compared to something you might see in a traditional entrepreneurship, high school class?
Well, I'm really fortunate in the environment I'm in. We're actually a campus of the University of Arkansas system. And so we have a lot more liberty than a more traditional education environment in what we can offer our students. Of course, we fill the state standards in the various courses, but then we can create courses like mine that exceed the state standards or are outside of the state standards. And so when you look at the state standards in Arkansas for entrepreneurship, they're similar to, I imagine, a lot of states, where it's business development, learning accounting and HR and marketing and all of these things that are really valuable. What I did when I developed my course actually was I went out and kind of did essentially what we would identify as customer discovery. I went and talked to people across all kind of the spectrum in education, all education levels, and I asked them questions about their education. What had been most impactful? What had really helped them in their career, and what had not helped them in their career? And by doing that kind of qualitative research and data gathering myself, I got right in front of my kind of core audience and found out what I wanted and what my course could and should be. And so from there, I was able to develop something that I think is unique. And I focus more on the customer and business development side of the equation. So there are places where students can get courses and training on building a business. They can learn the marketing, they can take accounting, they can do all those things. What I wanted to teach them, and what I tell my students, is I want to teach you to be employable for life. And to me, this means learning how to develop and recognize and capture value, and then articulate that value in the marketplace. And so I turned to Lean Launchpad, which is a curriculum, as Amber said at the beginning, that was developed in Silicon Valley, UC Berkeley, and Stanford, and kind of was a framework for NSF's I-Core program. And that's a master's program. And I kind of scaled it back, made it appropriate for high school students. And then I've integrated things like a statewide collegiate business plan competition. So students are getting kind of that bridge of, okay, now we've validated this idea. This is how we would take it to market. And they're thinking about all these things within the context of, this is all hypotheses at this point. This is all kind of our best guess. But within that context, they understand that they now have the tools to validate those ideas and validate those assumptions. So I'm really preparing them not for what they're going to do in my class, but what they may do down the road. What are they going to do in their second or third or fourth or fifth venture that is going to be more successful, and they're going to take on less risk because they've had this experience. So that's kind of was my intention. And what I found for students is really rewarding is once they learn those skills, they take those outside the class and apply those automatically. In my first year in the class, I had a couple of students who actually showed up in the summer in the co-work space where I work out of during the summer. And they were from different parts of the state. So I said, what are you guys doing here in Central Arkansas in Little Rock? And they said, oh, we got an internship with this startup out of DC that's going through this accelerator, and they're giving us an internship. And so these kids had gone and hunted that down on their own and applied what they learned in the class. So that was really rewarding.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I love that. Random question. What's like one of the coolest student ventures that have come out of your program that they like one of the coolest ideas that you can, I'm always interested in this kind of stuff.
Sure. So it kind of jumps all over the board. And I've actually, in full disclosure, I've now gone through the course just twice. So it's a very new course.
Yeah.
And I'll head back into the classroom for the third round this year. I've had a variety. A lot of them are software-based solutions. Typically, they're focused on some part of education or some pain point in education because that's what students are closest to. And so, but one of the most interesting came from actually outside my course. I mentioned the collegiate business plan competition. I had lobbied a local group to allow my students to compete in a collegiate business plan competition that happens here. It's a statewide competition. And we were granted permission to compete in this last year. And I had a group of students who came together and wanted to compete. And they were not in my course. They were in other capstone courses across our campus. And I said, great, I'll be your mentor. And they put together a solution called Pedagogue that is an app and a platform to help college students on college campuses connect to course-specific mentors that are peer mentors. And they put together of course, a business plan. And in kind of doing this exercise and this business plan, my goal the first or second year was just to get my students in the room to see what competition's really like. Well, these kids I think the average age, I was joking, is 16 and a half, went to the finals of the statewide competition, and they placed in the top 6 collegiate groups in the state. So I was very proud of that. And I still think this idea has business merit, and they're not going to continue this just because of where they are in their academic careers. But I thought it was really funny after the semifinals, another group from one of the other universities came up to them and had seen their presentation and said, what is your guys' exit strategy for your business? And my students came running up to me and they said, Mr. Steve, they asked us what our exit strategy is. What's an exit strategy?
They weren't even like thinking that far. That's amazing.
Yeah, so it's really great. And I think there's something incredibly valuable for going through that experience, for having to think at that level strategically. But also, I think it's valuable for students at that young age to have their work validated in that way, to recognize, oh, we were just working on this kind of academic thing that we could win some money for. I mean, honestly, the prize purse for this competition is high. And so, at 16, $25,000 is, at 40, $25,000 is a lot of money, but they're motivated by the potential, cash award. And here they are in an environment where real business people are validating this and saying, hey, I think you could have a business here. And I think that's invaluable, whether they continue with that idea or not. And that's kind of the goal of the business plan competition, is that students have that experience and not necessarily go and start the business, but recognize that they can.
Very cool.
Yeah, I love that you talked about getting kids interested in learning how to, capture value and see value in different places, because that's sometimes the biggest hurdle when it comes to, finding or developing a business plan or developing, an idea in the world. You have to find those, you said pain points. You have to find those things and recognize them for real and then validate them. And that's a really important part of the whole of starting that entrepreneurial journey for anybody. You mentioned that most of your stuff is software based. So is it, I know you do a lot with computer science. Is most of it computer science based in your entrepreneurship class?
So a funny story. No,
we love funny stories.
I am not a developer. I am not a technologist. My immediate boss is lobbying me heavily to become a developer. And I said, well, you better be careful how much you teach me, because you may have to double my salary when I have these new skill sets. I think what I've seen in my class is so far my class has been the students who either are purely interested in business and know they want to start business, or they're the students that haven't found a place to do their capstone experience elsewhere on our campus. Because we have about 16 or 18 different courses of study they can choose for their capstone research project. And entrepreneurship is one of those. So the dedicated technologists are going to do a computer science capstone. But I think because these students that we're teaching now are digital natives, that's the default. It's, I'm going to create an app. I'm going to create a platform. I'm going to create some sort of, technological solution. So that's kind of what I have seen. However, I had one student group in the last cohort that actually developed a business plan to refurbish and resell cell phones to reduce the amount of electronic waste that is in the world. And so that's another example of kind of a non-technical. Obviously, they would have leveraged technology probably to make that viable. But I kind of teach my students, there's a few mantras in my class that I teach them. One of them is this idea of, I'm going to teach you to be employable for life. But another mantra I teach them early on is, every company is a data company, every company is a tech company. It's just, no matter how lo-fi your solution is, where we are in the world, you have to consider yourself a data and a tech company. And no matter if you have those skills in computer science or, architecting software, you need to understand the basics. You need to understand how that works, in my opinion. And so we've been lucky at ASMSA to be involved in this kind of process of creating computer science education. Our governor, we had a new governor come in about now 5 years ago, was just reelected, but he ran on a platform promising computer science education in every high school across Arkansas. And to my knowledge, we're still leading the country in computer science education. Every high school in Arkansas now offers computer science education. And now we're pushing that into the middle schools and grade schools. And it's been a statewide initiative that everybody's gotten on board, and very quickly. And when we started this about 4 or 5 years ago, there were only 20 computer science teachers in the state. And now there's over, I think, 300 or 400 teachers that have been licensed in Arkansas. So in a relatively short time, we've reached scalability, and that has been in large, I think in large part due to the work of my colleague Daniel Moix, who's a nationally recognized computer science educator. And he developed a system for teaching teachers how to teach computer science. And so we've been very successful in that regard. And this last year, I piloted my course in entrepreneurship with a computer science teacher at a local high school. And we created a class called Computer Science and Entrepreneurship, where we blend this kind of applied problem solving to computer science education. Because one of the things that I'm very concerned about as we begin pumping out students who have tech skills is that we're pumping out developers, but we're not training systems architects. And so I'm really interested in teaching students how to architect solutions within the context of computer science. And that's kind of what our what we call CS&E is about. And this year, I'm excited to be able to do a beta test of that program with additional teachers from across the state. So I'm really excited to see where that goes and to watch these concepts integrated with a discipline that I don't have a deep bench in. But it's been a wonderful collaboration with some of my colleagues here on campus.
We talk about that a lot, the push for STEM, but not a parallel push for entrepreneurship, because they're literally creating the future, but they don't have the skills to start the businesses that those creations need to go into. And so that's one of our pillars at this point, Toy, is this need for, as you increase STEM, as you increase computer science initiatives, bring entrepreneurship with those, making sure that they understand and have those skills to launch the solutions that you're talking about. So I think that's really important. And I love that you're kind of leading the way on those collaborative programs. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, and I think it's really vital that we don't just commoditize our kids. Eventually, we'll get to a place where there are enough developers in the country, and we'll need these specialized developers. And I know one thing that the state in Arkansas that we're looking at now with our governor's kind of second term is they're focusing on cybersecurity and helping these students to kind of develop a specialty or a focus for their computer science skills. And I think that's really important. And one of the areas that we have seen at ASMSA that we kind of sit in kind of the sweet spot, if you imagine a Venn diagram with STEM and the arts and humanities, is that we're teaching students how to think and how to think more creatively. And we kind of sit in this really nice spot where at the convergence of STEM and the arts, where students can take a creative approach and have the technological skills to then execute on that idea, whatever it is. And so we've made some serious investment in the arts and humanities recently. Our school started as a pure STEM school. We started as a math and science school. And about 10 or 12, 15 years ago, we added the arts and humanities as a core focus. And so we've continued to really make investment in that, adding arts programs, additional training, and attracting additional students that really kind of round out the impact of the education experience that we're able to offer. So that's been really exciting. As someone, my background, actually, my undergrad degree is in piano performance. So someone who has more of an arts and creative music background, it's really cool to kind of see those come together. Because I'm kind of a nerd at heart. Like, I geek out over the tech too, but I appreciate being able to blend the arts with that.
That's so true and so important, that I think that we kind of, as a nation, kind of missed the connection between STEM and the arts, and because they're intrinsically connected. I mean, there really isn't a separation. If you are, if you're a scientist, that creativity has to be there, and kind of entrepreneurship blends all of that together. But we sort of came out of the gate a while back and said, okay, STEM, we're going to pump out these engineers and these scientists, but in order to do that, they have to, scientists have to innovate. They have to find solutions to problems that are important in the world. And so that all of those things blend together. And I think we're just starting to kind of get that as a country. They're not separate. They're one and the same. And it really is, like you said, it's about helping and teaching kids to learn how to think differently. Yeah. And see problems from different perspectives. And that's a big part of being well-rounded and being employable for life. That's part of it. You have to find those problems, and you have to find, come up with solutions to those problems in order to keep innovating. So that's really awesome. So you touched a little bit on this when you talked about your role kind of helping with developing teachers. And, we talk to teachers all the time. And so what advice might you have for teachers, educators that are interested in entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I think I was kind of thinking, gosh, what if somebody who's where I am or was a couple of years ago, or somebody who's been in education for years, but is really interested in, providing a different experience. I think it's obviously different for someone who's in a traditional environment. You have certain standards that are required, but I think there are ways that you can bring innovative thinking and entrepreneurship into your course. And one of the things that I really recommend for teachers is to get as close to their quote consumer as possible. I actually apply this by getting right in next to my kids at the end of every term. We sit down the last week of the term. Everybody's a little, squirrely. Everyone's ready for the break. And I just tell them, I said, look, I know you don't want to be here. I know we're all kind of coming to the end, but I need your help. I need you to help me redesign this course for the next year so it's better for the students that are coming behind you. And we deconstruct the course basically module by module or section by section. And we have deep conversations about what worked and what didn't, what they liked, what they didn't like, what connected and what didn't. And it's a brilliant opportunity for me to get inside my students' heads and hear where they are right now and what connects with them and what doesn't. The things that I think are brilliant, maybe not so much, or the things that kind of were on, at the spur of the moment and just, let me just plug this in. They're like, you know what, that really made an impact. And so I think for any teacher, no matter the class you're teaching, getting next to your students and talking with your students and finding even just 5, 10, 15 minutes to identify what they connected with and why can be very instructive. And so that's kind of a general piece of advice I would give anybody, no matter what you're teaching. The other thing is, I think when you are looking at the requirements of whatever your state standards are for whatever you teach, find ways to make it relevant. And we all talk about that in education. How do I make this more relevant? But it doesn't have to be super complex. It can be very simple. One of the things I encourage my colleagues in a more traditional environment to do is to make their students or give their students opportunity to make their work visible. And I think that's a big part of making students employable is helping their work to be seen outside of the classroom. We see them every day. They turn in reports, they do presentations, there's all these artifacts that we as educators collect, but unless that's visible outside the classroom, the student's value is limited by what they gain from what they're learning, because in their mind, it's, I did that thing for class and now I'm done and I pass them on to the next grade. But if you can help them to understand this is something you can leverage for impact into the summer, for that internship, for that scholarship application, for whatever it is, that is valuable. And you can do that in really practical, simple ways. Every town, no matter how small, has some sort of community organization. You have a JC's, you have a Rotary, you have, VFW, whatever the thing is in your town, or maybe there's multiple opportunities. If you have a chamber of commerce, there's some sort of coffee meeting or some sort of lunch meeting. Take your kids out or create a Zoom conversation where they can Zoom in and present in front of, a panel of business people in your community. Whatever it is, you can do this very creatively and very easily in a lot of ways if you just kind of think outside the box. So I think that's kind of the piece of advice I would give. And then a practical piece of, if you're teaching specifically entrepreneurship, one resource I've come across that is really helpful is the website teachingentrepreneurship.org.
Oh, I love those guys.
Yeah, they're good.
They're really great. They provide a lot of their curriculum open source. They'll put it out there for you to use, and I have used one of their lesson plans to great success. It's a lesson plan called the Ping Pong Ball Challenge, and I've used it with college students all the way down to grade school students, and it's a great very active activity. It gets students really engaged in thinking and talking and strategizing. And it's been really one of those versatile things I can take in almost any environment and implement. They have a full curriculum, and I really encourage people, if you have the funds and the support from your administration, really look at that curriculum. But one of the most recent value adds that those guys have given me is actually a lesson plan that they call idea generation versus problem generation. One of the biggest challenges I had as an entrepreneurial instructor, or have had, is helping students to come up with an idea. Because I start my class by telling students that they are not to bring an idea into the course, that they have to go find a problem. So it's very focused on the problem that they're solving, and then they have to develop a hypothesis about that problem and prove that that's a problem, and then they can talk about a solution. But I didn't have an easy way to scaffold students into that, and this particular lesson plan was really helpful. They go through kind of a 3-step process for helping students generate ideas and problems, and it's very focused on that idea of problem generation. So that's kind of a tactical ninja move, so to speak, that I would recommend for students or for educators if you're teaching entrepreneurship, even within the typical framework of kind of the business perspective, that is typical with most state standards. You could implement something like this to really help your students have a more dynamic experience. And I tell my students, hey, this framework is a problem-solving framework that you can use whether you start your own company or you're a manager, and you're helping your subordinates to, solve a problem in your company. No matter what it is, I try to help make that connection for my students, so that they can take that and then apply it in the future. And it's been really successful so far. I implemented it in a summer boot camp that I did this last summer, and it was really successful and helped the students really define a significant problem, but also an addressable problem. Because the first year I taught, I had a student come in and say she wanted to solve the problem of heart transplant rejection. And so I had to have a discussion of scope and how, that's a great plan for the next 30 years of her life. And I have no doubt that she will do that, but it's going to take a lot of in the lab research and would be on the scope of a 2-semester course.
What do you mean you couldn't help her solve heart transplant rejection in your course?
Well, yeah. So there are limitations even for superstars.
No, I love it.
Those resources are so good. Sorry, Amber, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but those resources are incredible, and I love Doan and Justin so much. I steal their stuff all the time. But what you said, really, really struck me at the very beginning when you said that you sit down with your students and deconstruct the course. Can you imagine, Amber, if every teacher did even a small version of that, what the education system would become? I mean, that gave me goosebumps. I'm like, oh my gosh, if every teacher would just be brave enough to do that.
Yeah. And I think for any listener that's in a traditional classroom, if you decide to embark down this road, understand that, Steve, you do this every year. So it's mostly little tweaks now at this point that they're like, this didn't work. Understand that if you're a traditional educator doing this for the first time, it may be an overhaul, but it's beneficial to your students. So don't be overwhelmed by this idea, because the students will have the best insights for your future students. And I think that I just want to encourage everyone to take that opportunity to really have that student voice be present, because it will be intimidating the first time, I'm sure. I can't imagine.
Well, and the beautiful part of it is I'm not perfect at implementing these things. I take and transcribe the conversations. I record them and I tell them I'm going to record this so I can go back and I transcribe everything so I have all the suggestions. But I just can't implement everything. But I pick 2 or 3 things that are really significant that really reshape, especially this first cycle I did. Then last year was the first major iteration, and it was a complete overhaul from the beginning. And I imagine this next class will be a little bit of an overhaul from that. just because I'm still kind of getting my feet under me in some regard. But the brilliant part is the students aren't going to be in my class again, but for me, they are on campus. So it's great because I can tell them, hey, I did this because you recommended this and it was really great and the students love it. And then our campus is small enough, they talk to each other and, they live with each other and their peers. So they kind of know, and they're like, oh, Mr. Steve changed one of the major suggestions. For example, last year, at the very first year I taught, I, at the end, did an inventory where the students had to inventory all the skills they had deployed and learned over the whole year. And then I helped them develop a narrative and a story arc that they could then craft and write in and then insert into a LinkedIn profile. And the student said this was really helpful, but it would have been helpful if we had our LinkedIn profile at the beginning of the year, and then we could add and build our network throughout the year as you introduce us to people and we meet people. And so that simple shift where at the beginning of the year, the first week, they build out a LinkedIn profile, and I have kind of cut and paste things they can put in, and we get them a headshot and they, upload their picture. We talk about how to interact professionally on LinkedIn. And then it just kind of sits there all year. But as I introduce them to people, I very publicly in front of the people that Zoom into my class or others, I ask, hey, can my students add you on LinkedIn? And then I tell my students, okay, hey, so-and-so talk to our class, add them on LinkedIn, send them a thank you message, tell them one thing that was really impactful to you and what you're going to take from their talk or whatever it is. And that's how my students the first year ended up tracking down that internship for themselves. They had done a public presentation, and they made a connection, and then they followed up on it. And so students get those skills if you just give them the path forward. But it can be little things. It will be overwhelming. I think for this course coming up, I have 3 or 4 pages of optimizations. I'm not going to add all those things, but it gives you a place to start.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. You're talking about operating your classroom as like the lean startup method, evaluation
Absolutely.
method, right? Like
and
100.
I tell that students. I tell them, I said, what I'm about to teach you, I'm doing right now. And I point it out to them so they recognize. And the other thing I would encourage my colleagues in education not to be concerned about, when I came into education, I was very intimidated by traditional educators because I thought, wow, these people know how to run a classroom and they're so amazing. And I still think traditional educators are the real heroes. I have a very unique environment in which to play. I have a really strange sandbox to kind of build a castle in, but the traditional educators are the real amazing, superheroes. But as a traditional educator, don't be afraid not to have all the answers. It's okay to not be the expert and say, and I do this with my students now, even if I could guide them, I say, I don't know, let's figure it out. And I tell my students, one of the mantras in my classroom is nothing's true that you think is true unless you bring me data. And so it's this reiteration of, I have an opinion, but it's as valid as yours. And even my opinion is invalidated until you bring me some sort of concrete, data that says otherwise. And so I think it takes a lot of pressure. I found it's kind of scary as a teacher not to have all the answers immediately ready, but it also takes pressure off over time when you can say to students, hey, let's figure it out. And it also helps students because they will want to come to you. Mr. Steve, what do you think of this business idea? And I tell them, you know what? It doesn't really matter. Let's find out. Like, it doesn't really matter. I think you should find out how big the market is. Go do some research. And that allows me to kind of, if I need to, I can fudge it a little bit. And if I don't, it also helps them to see that, you know what? You need to think on your own and you need to develop your critical thinking skills. And I'm not just going to give you a worksheet with the answer. And I'm not just going to give you a cut and dry. I tell my students at the end of the year, you can get an A in my class by coming to me and saying, this business plan is not viable because XYZ. And you can get an A in my class coming to me and saying, this is viable because of X, Y, and Z. Both are fine. And I make them stand up publicly and validate or articulate why they believe it's viable or not. Because I think there's something very freeing for a student to stand up and say, you know what, this is a bad idea, and this is where we find out why it is a bad idea. And I'm so glad we didn't take investment and we didn't waste anybody's time and money on this. And here's the skills we've learned. And the public have responded very well to that. You know, when they hear students that are able to articulate with that level of clarity their thinking, that's what I mean when I talk about making them employable for life.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
That's so brilliant. I have written down so many things, Steve. I mean, it just what an awesome perspective on. I mean, I wish we could. I hope every educator listens to this podcast because it's just a great perspective. And you're right. Teachers do get a little bit freaked out about not having the answers, but that's such a huge part of getting kids that deeper depth of knowledge and getting. I mean, we can't give kids information anymore. They have all the information they want in their pockets. And so all we can do is teach them how to think and how to use that information and leverage what they know and what they have available to them. So that's just so cool. I'm so glad we're talking to you today. And I ran out of papers. I'm like getting ready to start writing my own. It's been awesome. Oh my goodness. But with that, we are up against the time crunch here. So can you tell us, I mean, we could talk to you for another 20 hours probably, but how can folks get in touch with you if they want to do that?
Absolutely. I would love to connect with people. The number one way is going to be LinkedIn or Twitter. I'm also fairly active on Twitter. And you can reach me at Stephen E. Rice, Stephen with a V, middle initial E is in Edward, Rice. My last name is R-I-C-E, at Stephen E. Rice on both LinkedIn and Twitter. And people can connect with me there. And I love interacting with entrepreneurs, teachers, whomever, and figuring out and having these conversations, figuring out how we can be better at what we do. So would love to connect with listeners there.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. And we're so excited. We'll definitely have like a follow-up episode where we continue to follow the crazy things that you're doing in your classroom. So
Cool.
We'll be for sure be in touch. But thank you so much for your time today.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.